Hello everyone out there on YouTube land with this live Q&A. We're still experimenting with these live Q&As. We think we're going to try to do them say like once a month. Like once a month the Q&A will be a live Q&A and the other ones will be, we're still kind of mixing it up. You probably noticed the different Q&A I did like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. We're still experimenting with the Q&A format. There's some great fun stuff we can do. I know you guys are already in the comments section kind of pouring stuff in, so thank you for interacting in the comment section and prepping me with lots of really good questions. There's a really good episode. I'll talk about that coming up on Monday, but I'll probably talk about that toward the end. And there's some other like little news. If we're working on more merch stuff. If you remember the t-shirts, we're working on some more products like that so that folks that are interested in supporting the channel, but they really don't need, say, a copper pot or anything. There's some other products. So we're working on some ideas for some of those new things. And we have a few t-shirts left over if you want to go check out the website. And if you want to make sure to be around as those things sort of like sale things get talked about on the website. We actually have like a little newsletter sign up. Aaron will put that in the comment section if you're interested in signing up for our email newsletter. That'll be fun. We're already putting out a couple of things like that. So lots of good stuff, fun stuff happening. We're headed down to, I think, Conner Prairie in the next couple of days. I'm not sure what day we're doing it, but sometime next week we're headed down to Conner Prairie to do a couple more episodes. So lots and lots of stuff going on here at Townsend's and fun stuff happening with the channel. It's going to be good. I'm ready for some questions. What do you got, Aaron?
Okay, so we're going to get a little older one before people start asking. This one asks, where did it go? Okay. Does the surface of the earthen oven need to be flat and equal?
Does the surface? No. I mean, all that's happening with I don't know whether you're talking about the inner surface or the outer surface, but the surface of the earthen oven is just really a way to collect a whole bunch of heat. And the surface does not have to be perfect either on the inside or the outside. And generally, depending on the style of interior you're making, it sometimes can be easier to make a smooth outside than it is a smooth inside. But if you're using the sand core method, you can even get a smooth inside. But it does not have to be perfectly smooth. You just don't want it to be, so in solid as to have chunks of the oven fall down into your food as it's cooking. But generally, not a problem. Smoothness, no big deal. What else you got for me, Aaron?
Oh, go ahead. Here, come get on the mic. Oh.
Ryan's over here too. I've got Ryan and Aaron working the computers.
Senior Truffles is asking, out of all of the dishes we showed from the trip to Washington's estate, what do you think was your favorite?
Yeah, Mount Vernon. Let's see. Obviously, I mean, I like desserts, and the orange fool was really good. Let's see, probably the catfish stew or the fried catfish. The fried catfish. That's probably the one I'm going to go with. The other ones were great. And while we were there, you didn't see it on our channel, but we did a pink pancakes episode. That's actually on Mount Vernon's channel. And the pink pancakes were like really, really something. So maybe not like amazing in taste, but certainly amazing in color, and that was a fun one. So if you're interested in like just sort of, I don't know, you might call it a bonus episode, make sure to check out Mount Vernon's YouTube channel and look up the pink pancake episode. They have a couple different ones. Some of them are shorter, like little tiny, like 1 minute ones. Not that one. Don't do that one. Do the one where it talks about Townsend's or something like that.
Real quick before we do the next one.
Yep.
Whenever Ryan asks, since he's not on the mic, can you repeat the question?
Ryan,
so they can hear it?
okay, Ryan. Yeah, I'll repeat the question if Ryan does it.
All right, this is from Santa Claus Network.
Santa Claus Network, okay.
He is wondering if you can speak on what was acceptable for facial hair back in the 1700s.
Facial hair, 1700s. Really good question, and it's kind of a big question because there are a lot of different cultures happening, even in North America, and they all had different kinds of ideas about how much facial hair was appropriate. And there's even, of course, some change that's happening. Somebody's taking a picture. Even some change that's happening throughout that century. Things that are appropriate possibly at the beginning and the middle and at the end. It's changing all through there. So obviously the typically like the English folks that are in North America, facial hair, that's not a thing. You know, they did not have facial hair. You're definitely going to see some more facial hair in the French and in, you know, like the Spanish. And what's happening as they come to North America, I mean, some of those strict things, strict cultural norms that are happening possibly in Europe are a little loosened up in America, and you see things like, if we talk about wigs and hair, wigs were, you know, boy, if you weren't wearing a wig in England in the middle of the 18th century, you know, you're not doing very good. You're sort of breaking the social norms, whereas in North America, wearing your own hair in certain places was much more acceptable. So, generally speaking, if you're in an English setting, you shouldn't have any facial hair. If you're in these other ones, you should do a lot more research to find out exactly which, you know, is a mustache appropriate and not a beard, and there's a lot of different stuff going on there. Even within, you know, like 10 and 20-year time segments, it's definitely going to change.
I saw one earlier. I can't find it. There's so many questions. They were wondering what was the most difficult recipe we've done since we started doing cooking videos.
Difficult recipe we've done. There were some that took quite a while to perfect, and we had to keep experimenting with them. Like obviously something like the portable soup. Kevin spent many a night experimenting with portable soup to get it to actually do what it was supposed to do. And even then, sometimes you get done with the recipe and you think, oh, okay, are we at the end here? Is this actually the way it's supposed to be? And sometimes it's a judgment call. Yes, this is the way it's supposed to be, or no, I haven't gotten it yet. I would say portable soup is right out there on the edge of, boy, that one was trickier to figure out. Most of them are actually fairly simple. I mean, some of them might have some difficult techniques, or, you know, but generally speaking, most of the stuff we do on the channel is pretty simple. We stay away from the highly complicated recipes, and you do see some that are just, I mean, what are they doing? Taking forever, making all these different, you know, broths and mixing them together, when today we'd say, oh, well, we'll do that much more simply, and just, you know, run with one kind of a thing. So some of them are highly complex, and we just kind of simplify them and make them easier to do. Oh, just a quick shout out. Aaron said he saw Nicole Marley in the comment section at the beginning. Say hi, Nicole. Since you're always there at the beginning, you just jump right in and get that first.
Nicole comment. Is a legend.
Yes, the legend.
You got any you want to do, Ryan?
I'm looking at a lot.
Yeah, there's so many, guys. We're trying to keep up. Oh man.
I wonder if we could throw up the link to the Pink Pancakes.
Oh yeah, I'll find that.
One of them will try to find it for you. Yeah.
Description box?
Yeah, we'll try to put that link in the description box. And Pink Pancakes was one where, you know, when we went out there, they said, hey, can you know, have one prepared to bring to us? And man, you know, you go over to the wall of bookshelves and you just kind of pull a book off the shelf, which is what I generally do. It's like, oh, time for a new recipe. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Pull a book off the shelf, you know, flip it open, and, you know, go about 4 or 5 pages until one catches your eye, and man, Pink Pancakes, it was right there. I said, we got to do that one.
Do you have a place where people can come and visit you guys?
We do have a physical storefront right here in Pierceton, Indiana. It's sort of the heart of the universe. It's really, we're at the center of everything, right here in northern Indiana. Just a small town of like, you know, 2,000-3,000 people. There are a bunch of little antique shops. And then we have our storefront for Townsend's. It is open during the week from like 9 to 5, and on Saturday it's open from 10 to 3. Now, I am not always available or around, especially on a Saturday. I'm generally home. Some days we're out shooting videos, so we aren't available or aren't around. But a lot of people come and visit the store. I mean, let's see. There was Tennessee folks heading to Montana that stopped in this week. And who else has been in, Ryan?
We had a couple from Australia in this week.
Australia.
We also had some Wisconsinites.
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. So we get a lot of folks basically from all over the country, many times traveling to, family or some kind of thing that's, we're on the way. And so we get a lot of folks coming through. If you want to make sure and, say hi to me, you can ask ahead of time and I will try to be around if possible. But you never know. Things go crazy here and sometimes I'm here and sometimes I'm not.
Here's one. How did people in the 18th century know what kind of mushrooms were safe to eat, or vegetables in general?
Mushrooms is probably the most specific one versus, say, vegetables. Generally, vegetables aren't going to kill you. I mean, most of those kinds of plants are raised as food, and everyone knows what's appropriate or not. And mushrooms, I think, are very similar in that way within specific cultures. Around here, basically nobody eats anything but morel mushrooms. But if you go to someplace like Maine, they're going to eat chanterelles, and they might reject morel mushrooms as being poisonous. Everybody seems to have this like one or two mushrooms that's acceptable by the area or the area culture, and then everything else is I don't know if I would eat that or not. And those are the wild kind of mushrooms. But I think even in the 18th century, they were very sort of cultivating particular kinds of mushrooms, like we cultivate button mushrooms today, or shiitakes, or whatever. Different areas had different ones that they knew that they could grow that weren't going to poison everyone. And all the other ones, that's a toadstool, it'll kill you. Because who wants to test out a mushroom? There is no good and easy way to find out whether a mushroom is going to kill you unless you try it. Generally, there's a kind of a way to try things, smell it and then, taste tiny little bits. But even some of those mushrooms will kill you with a tiny little bit. So kind of scary testing out those mushrooms that you do not know about. I think they did it almost exactly the same way we do it today.
We've covered this before, but it's a common question. How would a typical 18th century tavern be set up, and what food and drink would they typically serve?
Taverns are really, Ryan says, how were taverns set up? I mean, what was typical? There's a lot to learn about taverns, and I think we have a lot of misconceptions about taverns, especially in this 18th century context. And, it could be a bit, specific for the region. Imagine somebody's house, maybe a slightly bigger house than normal, and you're traveling through the area and, hey, I don't have a place to stay. I want to eat something, and you go and knock on the door. I mean, it seems like if you read a lot of the travel journals, they just kind of, well, it's time to stop. We don't have any place to stop. We're on horses, and look, there's a house. Let's go knock on the door and stay there. We wouldn't do that today necessarily, but that seemed to be pretty par for the course at least in North America, because it was a little bit more sparsely settled. And they had these specific taverns or inns, and they really are a lot more like somebody's house. And they've kind of set aside a room where you would go and eat there. And instead of it being like a restaurant where there's a menu and it's like, well, today we've got this, and that's what there is to eat. And you go to the tavern and you eat whatever is, offered to you, or else you don't eat. And many times it was very rudimentary. It was simplistic. I mean, it might be nothing but a bowl of, milk or bread soaked in milk or something like that. And today we would think, what is this? There's no way I'm going to stay at this weird place, eat this weird food. But it was really, really common in the 18th century. And they just didn't have anything like what we have today, or any of the same kind of expectations. we're hoping to dip in. There's a lot of great research out there, folks that have done a lot more research about that kind of stuff than I have, and I'm hoping to interact with some of those folks and get you some more of that kind of information, because it is really, really interesting. What else do we got, guys?
Do you have any insight on what gambling was like, what gambling games were played in the 18th century?
I don't have, Ryan's got a question about gambling and games and gaming in the 18th century. Obviously a very common thing that's going on within the 18th century. If you think about it, I mean, they didn't have the same kind of entertainment that we have. We can almost think about that whole entertainment idea, and boy, it's so much more different than we have today. There weren't a lot of books. They obviously didn't have the internet or anything like television or films. So they're going to be doing totally different kinds of things for entertainment than we would do. And games and gambling, that's going to be a lot more popular than we would expect today. And there obviously were card games, dice games, you know, other kinds of games that would be played by adults in adult settings. I don't have a lot of those, you know, maybe off the top of my head. A lot of the stuff we play today is based on 19th and 20th century things, but a lot of those roots go back into 18th century games. And I think a lot of them, while we may not know the exact rules, they would be very similar to a lot of the games that we play today, and a really popular pastime for folks. And imagine that same thing with the pastime, live music. You know, they didn't have any recorded music, and lots of people were playing live music, even if it wasn't amazing. It was what you did in the evenings, and reading things together. You know, even just reading the newspaper, because there's only one newspaper. So, evenings entertainment is a great topic.
Here's it's kind of a big one, but it's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
How did bakers or brewers extract or gain their own yeast for baking and brewing?
So the question is, where does this yeast come from, especially in the 18th century context? And it's obviously a complex problem, especially if you start interacting with different cultures, because different cultures are going to do different things. And I am not well versed in like what's going on with capturing yeast or cultivating yeast necessarily in like the German culture. So there's definitely going to be some twists and turns there, or even any kind of Eastern Europe or Northern European thing. If you look at the English things and you look at the cookbooks and you kind of get a feel for what they talk about when they're talking about yeast and barm, and whether it's brewing or baking, they're talking about always getting that from someplace else, not sort of cultivating wild yeast on their own. So, you know, a brewer would get more, he would get that yeast, if he didn't have any, from a different brewer. And the bakers are always generally getting that yeast from the brewer so that they can bake bread. Even when you see, there'll be some recipes in 18th century cookbooks, English cookbooks, where it'll say how to make yeast. And you're thinking, yes, they're going to talk about wild yeast cultivation. And then all of a sudden they say, okay, to make yeast, you go get some yeast, and then so obviously, you know, they're always starting off with a pre-found yeast, and then they propagate it and they make more of it. There are certainly instances and circumstances where you can find wild yeast cultivation going on in the 18th century, and even in at least a North American context. There's a book by a farmer, and he talks about all the things that are going on his farm, and he's in New Jersey, and right there in the 1770s, there's a little recipe talking about cultivating of wild yeast. So there is some wild yeast cultivation going on, things that we would do today, where, I mean, generally, if you can collect yeast basically instantly with no work at all. You take flour and water and a little bit of salt, and you mix it up into a dough, and you plop it down on the countertop, and you just wait. and it will start to do things. Whether you like it or not, there's yeast in there. Yeast from your hands, yeast in the air, yeast from the actual flour itself, and it will start taking off. But they do not talk about that generally, especially in 18th century cookbooks. Hopefully that was a little bit of answering that question.
That
It's
was
a big
long.
one.
That was a long answer.
Sorry. Sorry. I get excited about that kind of stuff, and then the answer explodes. There's so many places to go with that, that it can be a long answer.
Here's a real quick one. It's kind of funny, but my answer is soon, hopefully. It says, are you going to show us how to fire a cannon someday?
How to fire a cannon?
We got to do one.
Yeah. I know several people with cannons, and we haven't recently done anything like that. I know I've got some ancient cannon footage, but that sounds like fun, doesn't it? I like artillery, and maybe I'll talk to JH or I'll talk to Dave, but we'll see if I can schedule some cannon footage coming up.
John,
Yes.
several people still do not believe you. Did you like the Parmesan ice cream?
Parmesan ice cream.
What's the real answer?
Why don't
So
you
good.
believe me? I think it's just
So
because you're not used to the idea of Parmesan ice cream. Parmesan ice cream is excellent stuff. So don't take my odd, facial expression in that particular video, if there was one. Or I think most people are just reading into the idea. They think Parmesan ice cream and they think it's going to be horrible. Turns out it's really, really, really good. So if you get a chance to try out Parmesan ice cream, do it.
All right, repeat the question. Have tastes changed over time? Are most of the recipes something people would still enjoy today in regards to saltiness, sweet, and savory?
Have tastes changed a lot? And are the tastes that are coming out of the 18th century things, are they still palatable to us today? Well, generally things like saltiness, it is impossible for us to tell how salty some of these recipes were. Now, they salted a lot of stuff, and they would put up with a lot of saltiness that we might not necessarily today put up with, because they were using it as a preservation method. So, I mean, saltiness is a trick. I mean, we can guess and say that they tended to like their things more salty. Sweetness, we definitely know that, at least as a big picture general rule, that they were consuming much less sugar than we do today. And some of the recipes that we talk about that have specific sugar measurements, those are probably very, very expensive recipes in the time. So generally they probably had them much sweeter. But the tastes in general, all the ones that we can guess that we've gotten really close to, are very, very palatable for the modern palate. I mean, for mine, and I'm a picky eater in a lot of different ways. Obviously, you can tell by some of the recipes where, it's like, I'll make a face about eating beets or something, right? But generally, I think their tastes are going to be very similar to ours. There may be some odd textures, but I mean, that's true with any culture when you go from one to another, whether it's modern or you go backwards in time. I think there's always some of that. Okay, that's weird. Do I want to try that? Parmesan ice cream, right? Same kind of thing. What else?
How literate was the populace back then, and are there any must-read books for people to read now?
Oh boy, that's a tricky one. Okay, so the question is, how literate was the population back then, and are there any must-reads from the 18th century that we should really, grasp onto? And that second question is such a good one that I will not answer it today, because I know there's probably some I would miss it. So let me hold that one off for a little bit. But literacy is a good question, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there are some really interesting statistics that, if are true, are just utterly amazing. Now, literacy in Great Britain during the time period, probably not amazing. And how do you define literacy? Even today, it's not that necessarily easy. It's like, at what grade level do you say that's literacy, and below it, it isn't literacy? But generally speaking, apparently the population in North America during, say, like the Revolutionary War was very, very literate, way up in the 90s. One of the things you'll see, and it's talked about, like how popular Common Sense, the Thomas Paine little pamphlet, they printed hundreds of thousands of copies, and the population of North America was rather small at the time, meaning that almost everybody had access to it and wanted to read it and did read it. There's, there are some clues to some very high literacy numbers happening within North America, all without any kind of, government education system or anything like that. In Great Britain, probably I would, I mean, off the top of my head, I would probably say 50 to 60% of people were somewhat literate. So excellent question, and boy, I wish I had numbers that I could spit out for you and tell you about that. Books, an easy read. It's not 19th century. It's or not 18th century. It's 19th century. But the Private Yankee Doodle book. It's not called Private Yankee Doodle. It's memoirs of Joseph Plum Martin, soldier in the Revolutionary War. Very, very fun, very readable book where he talks about his adventures in the Revolutionary War. Probably written in the early 19th century. Gives you some of those kinds of ideas about some of the writing in the 18th century. There's so much available online that you can just read, and even the cookbooks give you some ideas as you're reading through them. The great way they phrase things, or odd words that you run into. I'll try to find some book ideas, and maybe we'll touch on that topic in future Q&As.
How easy or hard was it for common people to get a hold of spices, especially ones that didn't originally grow in the Americas?
Spices, how common were they, especially spices that were imported? And I mean, any spice worth its salt is imported, right? As some of the spices were much more easily gotten and ubiquitous or common for regular people to have than others. And generally, I mean, the list, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I think they had a lot of things available to them. Some of the ones might surprise you. Ginger was one of the most popular spices that you'll find. Apparently imported, but very inexpensive during the 18th century. Nutmeg, obviously, duh. That one's going to be just super popular, definitely expensive probably in the beginning, and that's one of the reasons why you see it showing up in so many recipes, and it was in demand because it was expensive, but still, popularly available. And then as you go into the 19th century, there's sort of like a monopoly that's broken on nutmeg, and it gets much more common. And then like today, nobody even eats it, right? So nobody uses it. It's common and inexpensive. So maybe the thing that makes spices more common and more used is because they are harder to get and more expensive. I mean, I think that's one of those things. Nutmeg, ginger. There's going to be some interesting things happening with peppers, and boy, there's more research to do about pepper, even like the chili peppers and whatnot there. I'd like to dig into the English versus the North American thing that's going on with chili peppers. I just read recently in Peter Kalm's Travels in America. He does it in about 1750, 1749, and he talks about chili peppers. And he uses the French name for chili peppers being used very commonly and as pepper, like you would use it that commonly because salt and pepper were in everything. So people were using it like just pepper that commonly in eating, at least in some regions in North America. Whew. Again, one of those long answers. What else do you guys got?
Have you seen a reference to double boilers being used, maybe in something like portable soup?
Double boilers. I don't think I think you will find reference to double boilers or doing things in a double boiler like fashion. Maybe not that it was actually one piece of equipment. This is my double boiler, but putting a pan inside of a pan. You don't see the references to it a lot, but that's just what's right here in the top of my head. So double boiler. Don't know quite how to answer that one.
Hang on, I had one and I lost it. 'cause
These guys
so many awesome
losing the questions. I'm glad I don't have a screen in front of me. It would probably consume me, and I wouldn't be able to talk to the camera.
There are several questions about hot sauce.
Mm-hmm.
Do we know if anybody was using chili peppers to make sauces, anything like that?
Well, you're definitely going to find that happening in the early 19th century. But what? Oh, hot sauces. Sorry, I have to raise back. The question was, I'm repeating it, is did they use chili peppers in making hot sauces? And I don't have anything off the top of my head for that going on in the 18th century, but certainly as you go into the 19th century, you're finding those kinds of things being made. And there's some of these kind of even like there's, oh boy, I'd have to do the research on it to say it specifically, but I think there's actually some of that kind of Indian curry saucy things happening in England in the late 18th century, but I've not specialized in that kind of research, so I don't
This
have
is not related to history necessarily.
Okay.
What does John Townsend have on his bucket list?
What do I have personally on my bucket list?
1 million subscribers.
Oh, 1 million subscribers. That's what Aaron's got.
That gold plaque.
Yeah. You've thrown me off base with that one. I do not have a 30-second answer to a bucket list kind of thing.
How difficult is it to avoid using lead in many of your reproductions? You would think a lot of original items you replicate would contain much more lead than we allow today.
Yeah, what's happening with lead in the 18th century or when we do reproductions? And yeah, lead was pretty common. They even used it on the tips of baby bottles. So, I mean, that's what you want to use on your little baby bottle. Generally, we can substitute tin for lead in just about anything that we need to make as a reproduction. The pewter buttons that we have are 96% tin instead of a period button that probably would have been 50% lead at the time. The solder is, you can easily come up with lead-free solders. I can't think of anything that you just have to have lead. A few people still are using lead on individual products when it doesn't come in contact with people that much. But almost across the board, I can't think of anything that you just have to have lead for. Even the musket balls, if people are live firing like lead musket balls, or you can actually shoot tin ones. I mean, it's not as heavy, it's not as good, but generally you can get away without lead.
How come cured meats were less common in the U.S. than in Europe at the time?
Well, I'm not sure if I would say they were. I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know. I think that would be hard to prove. I think they probably were as common. If they weren't as common, it would have been because the nitrates, potassium nitrates, sodium nitrates, nitrites might not have been as easily available, but I'm not even sure. I think the commonality of those has to do with more about how accepting the culture was of that. But even then, I'll bet you it was pretty common in North America. What do you think, guys? One more question?
Oh, I was just letting Ryan know that I had one.
Go ahead.
And I lost it because it keeps scrolling. Oh, okay, here we go. How did you get into living history? Is it a family tradition?
Yeah, I grew up doing this. My father had a Civil War musket given to him, handed down to him in the family in the mid-60s. He got interested in muzzle-loading guns, maybe even earlier than that. In the late 60s, Dad was going down to the National Muzzle-Loading Rifle Matches in Friendship, Indiana. And so he got interested in that, in the time period, or back in the early 70s, and there was some, not just people shooting guns, but people wanting to camp out in a primitive way down there at the time. He saw a need, and Dad's one of those kind of people, he likes to start businesses, and he saw this need, and so he said, that's the kind of business I want to be in. And so, you know, he started doing that in the early 70s, and I was, you know, however old I was at the time, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And so, you know, all that time I got to, you know, be a kid, play, do those things, be involved with that stuff. So I've grown up in it the whole time, and it's, you know, sort of a family tradition. So we have a lot of fun. And it's such a great thing to do when you're a kid, because, you know, it's like, I get to play Cowboys and Indians for real. So it's a lot of fun.
What should I do if my hat goes limp? I've ordered hats from you guys. Over time, they lose their shape. Can I correct
This is a really good example. This one been a hat. Okay, sorry, I got to repeat his question. Got to get him a microphone. Anyway, what happens when your hat goes limp and gets all soft? As some people really like it when the hats get very soft and pliable and get very, very comfortable, but they lose their look. And Ryan could probably answer this question as good as I can, because Ryan works on hats all the time now. But generally what happens is you have to re-stiffen your hat, and you do that with shellac. And it's a diluted shellac that gets painted onto these hats, and then that stiffens up the felt that these hats are made out of. The trick, though, is that your hat's lost its shape. And if you made it stiff again, you would just make it stiff in its, you know, out of its shape. If you just need to stiffen it, you can paint it with a thinned shellac. And you can experiment on a small part of the hat if you want to stiffen up your hat and you know, try that out. That's what they used in the time period, and that's what we use on hats today. But it is whenever you get a lot of moisture or you get a lot of heat, the stiffener stops being as stiff. Or if you just get a lot of heat but there's still a lot of stiffener, it can your hat can, you know, malform, and then it doesn't fit your head anymore, or it doesn't look right anymore. So don't leave your hat in the back window of your car. It'll get all weird on you. And hats are always like trying to shrink. That's why hat stretchers are really good too. You want to put a hat stretcher in your hat. You don't want to get it wet, and if it does get wet, well, probably need to put some shellac on it. And if you shellac them a lot, they get really, really hard. Like I don't know, we experimented with one where we just shellacked it over and over and over again. Got like wood hard. It was really, really hard. So I'm going to call that quits there with the questions, because
hold on.
What, you got one more?
Yeah, they've been
Oh boy.
commenting a lot, and it's a teacher
Okay.
who uses the channel for education.
Sure.
So, can I substitute the gelatin in the meat pie recipe with just a cider?
So what's happening within that meat? It's probably that little meat pie in the hard dough is what he's talking about, the hard shell. You know, that gelatin is in there to hold all that material in place, because that's really meant to be a way of storing food into the future. Generally, these meat pies were not just eaten right away willy-nilly, but they were used like the next day or the next week or even the next month, which we might find that, you know, it's like, oh, that's going to kill me, but they did it all the time. But that gelatin is there to hold all those contents in there and keep it together and in a non-liquid state, so it doesn't, you know, disintegrate on you over time. If you're going to eat it right away, yep, you could use cider. Sure. Are we good?
Nicole wants to know if we would ever collaborate with Gordon Ramsay.
Gordon Ramsay. You know, I suppose.
If he would have us.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, I don't know if people want to put up with me in that kind of way, but yes, if other folks want to collaborate with us, we're interested in some of that kind of thing. Yes, Ryan.
There are a couple comments asking for a traditional Thanksgiving meal video. You can point them to that.
People are asking about traditional Thanksgiving meals. We did a whole series in Amelia Simmons. She talks about kind of the things that we would almost connect with Thanksgiving. So there's a series, a playlist. We'll put a link down in the description section. Got it. Okay. These guys are making, they're trying to trip me up back there, making hand signals, and I don't know what they're doing. Anyway, we do have, I do want to point out Monday's episode is coming, and it's kind of a special episode. We kind of, it was a kind of a spur of the moment episode, but we got some really, really interesting footage, and we shot it in a different way than maybe we do normally. So Monday's video ought to be really good. Oh yeah, and it's got a special ingredient. It's not nutmeg. Did we have any nutmeg in that? No nutmeg in it, but a special ingredient. You're going to love it, so make sure to check out Monday's episode. I do want to super duper thank the folks on Patreon that support us. There's like 250 or so people that support us on Patreon, and it helps us in kind of special ways. And you'll find out about that in the next couple of weeks. And really, the support we have from you guys is so amazing. The comment section, and you know, when you go to our website or you support us, or just watching our videos and telling other people about them, sharing them online, all that is so special, so kind. I really am amazed by people reaching out and telling us about how the channel affects them. And you know, even when, okay, I have a bad day and I, you know, do a video saying, you know, people bug me on the channel, which I don't do very often, but you know, you guys are really special. So I really want to thank you for all your amazing support and watching today on this live broadcast. Wow, this is hard to do. Thanks so much for watching.